We should mention that Senator Hancock will not be present today, so we're working with 4 members. Yeah. So we're next going to hear from Assemblymember Gonzalez with AB 1461 relating to voter registration. Nice to see you, Assemblymember, and congratulations on the governor's signature this morning.
Better under these conditions, isn't it? So, no red today. Congratulations, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and members. We know that voter registration still stands as one of the biggest barriers to civic participation in our state, and that's why we brought AB 1461, the California New Motor Voter Act, before you today, with Secretary of State Alex Padilla as the sponsor of this bill. Simply put, the California New Motor Voter Act aims to make voter registration easier when citizens interact with the DMV, thereby increasing opportunities for eligible citizens to participate in our democracy. Specifically, AB 1461 will require the DMV to automatically transfer voter registration information to the Secretary of State when a citizen obtains or renews a driver's license or state ID. In fact, this year's budget contains an appropriation for the DMV to enhance the online driver's license renewal process that would make for easy and smooth compliance with this requirement as we begin to modernize the state's bureaucratic processes. AB 1461 will also require the Secretary of State to provide notice to the citizens stating that they will be registered to vote unless they decline that registration within 21 days. Lastly, AB 1461 will require the Secretary of State to provide the records to the county election officials to the county in which the person may be registered to vote if eligible to vote. With AB 1461, it's our hope that California will register the nearly 6.5 million unregistered citizens and then simply focus on getting them out to vote. Additionally, while I do believe it's important to discuss what this bill does, it is equally important to discuss what this bill does not do. Since 1994, every applicant in California has been required to provide verification of birth date and proof of legal presence in the United States, which will allow the DMV to distinguish eligible voters from ineligible voters if the proper documents have been presented. As such, this bill explicitly prohibits the DMV from transmitting information to the Secretary of State about individuals who applied for or received an AB 60 license. It does not allow for the registration of undocumented or ineligible persons. With me today to elaborate on the merits of this bill is California Secretary of State and former Senator Alex Padilla.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Secretary Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, first I want to thank Assemblymember Gonzalez for her leadership on this issue, along with the joint authors, Assemblymember Alejo and Assemblymember McCarty, and to commend this committee for holding the series of hearings that you've held, looking at different ways of improving voter participation. As you referenced a few minutes ago, Mr. Chairman, we've been working together on a comprehensive package that tackles both the registration as well as the turnout sides of the civic participation equation, but it all begins with voter registration. As Assemblymember Gonzalez mentioned, there's more than 6.5 million eligible but unregistered voters in California. California ranks 38th in the nation when it comes to the registration rates for eligible citizens in our state. And in fact, under federal law, it's acknowledged that federal and state government should do what they can to facilitate the participation of all citizens in our democracy. And I believe that's exactly what this bill does. It takes a new approach to requiring government to ensure that all eligible citizens are registered to vote. Just by way of history, to show how our not just policies, but our laws and approaches for doing so can evolve over time. Once upon a time, the voting by mail was only an option for active members of the armed services, because when you're on a tour of duty, it's tough to get back to your polling place on Election Day. In time, we saw it fit that voters with certain valid excuses could also vote by mail, but you still needed an excuse that was acceptable. And eventually, we allowed sort of no excuse vote by mail, and now even permanent vote by mail, where if you're so registered, you automatically get your ballot in each and every election. Similarly, we're building on the motor voter law that was enacted more than 20 years ago, when at the time it was still a paper voter registration process. And we had the vision of affording an opportunity for somebody to conveniently register to vote when dealing with the DMV. Well, in this day and age, this bill asks us to use our basic common sense data and technology capabilities in cases where citizenship and age and name and address and all that has been verified to systematically register voters with an opt-out provision. As the Assembly member has mentioned, voters would be alerted that if they chose to opt out, they could notify the Secretary of State or the county's office within 21 days, but the default would be being added to the voter rolls. Voters would also be given an opportunity to select their political party because government cannot choose it for them, but not just a political party, designating language preference and all other information currently captured on a voter registration form. I also want to make sure that we emphasize that we maintain the strong confidentiality laws that are in place for victims of domestic violence, for public safety officers, judicial officials, and any others that enjoy that confidentiality protection. With that, happy to entertain any questions you may have and respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there witnesses in support of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Christy Baumer on behalf of the California Professional Firefighters, the author and sponsor said it well. We are pleased to be in support.
Kelly Dado on behalf of California League Conservation Voters in support, and also a Me Too for Sierra Club. Thank you.
Nicole Wertelman on behalf of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors in support.
Jill Levine representing the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials in strong support. Thank you.
Michael Bolden on behalf of the Service Employees International Union in support.
Jason Feifel on behalf of California Public Interest Research Group. We support this bill.
Steve Kalmer on behalf of the Board of Supervisors of Los Angeles County. We thank the author and the Secretary of State for their forward-looking legislation.
Sean Connolly with University of California Student Association in support.
Jim Soper on behalf of myself, I support the bill.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Are there any speakers in opposition to the bill? And you can come up here to the table. Thank you.
Members of the committee, Raul Macias on behalf of the ACLU of California. We share the Secretary Padilla and Assemblymember Gonzalez's interest in improving our state's voter registration rate. And we appreciate the open dialogue we've had with the Secretary of State's office and with Assemblymember Gonzalez, where we have shared our serious concerns about this bill. And we regret we must oppose the bill unless it's narrowed to improving and modernizing DMV's prospective voter registration system. And so a particular concern is the intent of the bill to authorize the retrospective registration of DMV license and state ID holders and the serious collateral risks and consequences it presents for non-citizens. So first, California DMV does not now and has not previously tracked the citizenship status of applicants. And for years, DMV employees have been hand entering a record of the documents provided by applicants to establish legal presence. This system is subject to human error and was not designed or intended to track or later produce accurate citizenship data. And there's no evidence that DMV has confidence in its ability to reliably extrapolate citizenship from its document tracking system. And second, given the potential for data errors, there's a real threat that large numbers of non-citizens will be caught up in the look back for eligible voters in the DMV database. These non-citizens could then be unwittingly added to the state's voter file, and an opt-out postcard does not provide adequate protection against these errors, particularly when there's no prior notice that engaging in a DMV transaction, so potentially years ago, that could result in later being registered to vote, and that someone could easily ignore a postcard from the government, particularly if it's not received in someone's preferred language. Yeah. And a non-citizen could mistakenly believe that receipt of a postcard from the government saying that they are being registered to vote means that they are eligible to vote. So the potential for consequences of unknowingly being registered to vote or mistakenly voting are frightening. Under federal law, it can result in ineligibility for visa or other immigration benefits, the denial of naturalization, and even deportation. And these negative consequences can occur regardless of whether a person understood their ineligibility. So in other words, it's a strict liability standard. The bill makes no attempt to immunize non-citizens from criminal prosecution if the state mistakenly registers them and they fail to opt out or if they vote. And unfortunately, there's no way for the state to legislate protections against the negative federal immigration consequences that I just described. So we encourage the authors to instead focus on modernizing the implementation of the NVRA at DMV and to craft language that provides for the electronic transfer of voter registration data to the Secretary of State once a DMV consumer has completed an electronic voter registration application and affirmatively attested to their eligibility to vote. And that's what Section 5 of the NVRA explicitly requires. States that have offered voter registration at the DMV in this seamless and automated fashion have seen dramatic increases in registrations at the DMV, and you're still talking about millions of transactions at the DMV each year, even if this is just a prospective program, and so we encourage the authors to look at that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for your very well-received comments, and I also have your letter here, which I assume you've provided to the authors. Okay. Other witnesses in opposition? Or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, apologies for being late. We're California Labor Federation here in strong support.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let me launch right into your response to some of these concerns. I certainly think that you're two people who would be very sensitive to the sorts of concerns that have been raised. How do we make sure that these are adequately addressed?
Well, since 1994, the DMV has been tracking the type of identification used to get a driver's license. And two of those identifications are subject to either falsifying documents or using a birth certificate, U.S. birth certificate, which shows that you're a citizen, or a U.S. passport, which shows that you're a citizen. And so it is only the information from those individuals that will be forwarded. In fact, this is the most comprehensive kind of check on U.S. citizenship that we will ever have had in California. So although, yes, there's human error, and I'm sure that it will state in the postcard received to them that, if for some reason they're ineligible, they should come off. But to suggest that the DMV is somehow incompetent in what they've done this whole time, to suggest we can't move forward because of some incompetence, I think is unfortunate. Now, might there be a case where somebody falsified documents to get a driver's license? Absolutely. We see that has happened. But if they falsified those documents to get a driver's license, quite frankly, they're going to have the same problems with federal law that they have whether or not their information is forwarded to the Secretary of State or not. Those documents that are usually falsified are not birth certificates and U.S. passports. I mean, that's just from background of working with immigrants and not passing judgment, but it's often a false Social Security number that was used. So that is somebody who did not provide the information to show that they were a citizen would not be moved forward. AB 60 candidates obviously will not be moved forward. You would have to have had provided a U.S. passport or a birth certificate. So the problem really is we are leaving some folks out who will be eligible, who are U.S. citizens, who might have provided like a military ID card because that could be obtained by somebody who was not a citizen. But I think we've constrained this enough that I feel very comfortable in what we would be moving forward to the Secretary of State's office.
Very well said by Assemblymember Gonzalez, with the additional reminder that it's not as if there isn't voter registration going on through DMV today. We're not completely starting from scratch here. Trust me, to our friends at ACLU, I get the concern. We get the concern, and it's not lost on us. If this was a new, never tried for before effort to register voters through the DMV, that'd be one thing. But since motor voter was first passed at the federal level nearly 2 decades ago, we've had the question of what about people who aren't eligible to register to vote. AB 60 that was passed and signed into law a couple of years ago, its implementation in large part focused on ensuring there was a mechanism to make sure that people who are not eligible in applying for an AB 60 driver's license didn't get caught up in a voter registration opportunity process as required by federal law. So the mechanisms have been in place. Going to a more automated system ensures, I think, that not only a mechanism stays in place, but as the author has explained, it's frankly possibly, arguably, a more secure way to register voters, because there has to have been a birth certificate or a passport presented, maybe not for proof of citizenship, more for proof of date of birth. But once that's duly noted in the record, then only those eligible would be transmitted to Secretary of State for purposes of voter registration. So a document was shown at one point and reflected in the record as opposed to simply checking boxes and signing a card under penalty of perjury. So.
Right. Tell me, and any one of you can weigh in on this, but Secretary, how much confidence do you have in the DMV's records? Obviously, they've been collecting these records for a long time, but with a totally different purpose in mind, right? This is all about making sure that people who are eligible to drive are given their driver's eligibility and then held accountable for mistakes made on the road, points on their record, whatever else. That's been the focus of their record-keeping system. They're not an immigration service. They're not an agency of the INS or the ICE or the federal government. We all know that big government bureaucracies, maybe incompetence too strong a word, but that mistakes are made, and if the consequences can be quite as dire as have been raised, we would all, I think we all can agree, would want to avoid putting perfectly innocent people into that sort of ridiculously difficult situation just because they registered to drive but not to vote. Moving forward, obviously, every new registrant, the paperwork will be very well done and everything will be perfect. But given this retroactive aspect, which I think is a good thing to do, by the way, it's going to register more people. How much confidence do you have in the record keeping system from DMV as it relates to this set of concerns?
Well, I don't assume the incompetence of the DMV, and the same question that's being applied here prospectively applies retroactively. Is the record keeping being done at DMV when somebody's applying for a driver's license and demonstrating a proof of date of birth? Checking a box, passport, checking a box, birth certificate, checking a box, military ID, checking a box, whatever that approved documentation is. Again, both retroactively and prospectively, I think we'd be hard-pressed to say DMV counter employees need to be experts in identifying false or fabricated documents versus the real thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have any comments on this, Mr. Macias?
Well, I would just say one difference between what Motor Voter was doing before. I mean, this is really a different model. Motor Voter contemplates an opt-in system, and that's sort of the protection that Congress thought about, that people are,
right.
It requires them to see the eligibility requirements and that they're testing under penalty, they're signing under penalty of perjury that they meet those eligibility requirements. And this is something different. So I think it is a lot different from what Motor Voter contemplated. And we just have, I don't have an idea of the accuracy of DMV's
right.
records, and we've asked that question many times, and I don't think we've had a satisfactory answer yet.
I mean, ultimately, though, the people who are going to be in most trouble are the ones who falsified documents. And maybe they did it not because they were intending to break election law, but it's still hard to have a ton of sympathy for them, but though at the same time, we all know that people are put in difficult situations. So it's a tough situation, and I guess, I think that's maybe your biggest concern ultimately. I mean, surely the ACLU sees the value in trying to expand the franchise and access to franchise.
Of course. But there is also the potential, when people are coding these in, that this, we don't know what mistakes were made, and someone who even just unwittingly gets registered, they may not have submitted a false document, but that they just somehow they submitted some other document that got coded the wrong way as a birth certificate, that they could wind up caught up in the system too.
But again, that the potential for human error, whether it's retroactive or prospective, will always remain as long as there's humans involved.
Sure.
So this automated registration process, we think can replace a lot of potential for human error through a paper process and a, sign here under penalty of perjury process with one that's much more systematic and I would argue secure. Mr. Chairman, respectfully, we knew very well coming into this hearing that this question, this concern was going to be raised, and we share it. I think we agree on the concern, and we're just not in complete agreement on, how to completely address it in the bill. Conversations, stakeholder meetings, negotiations, et cetera, continue to take place. We know this bill is dual referred. So today it's Elections Committee. In a couple of weeks, we'll be in the Transportation Committee that oversees the DMV. So I think we'll be suited to have more of an in-depth discussion on education, training of DMV employees, if you will, in that committee and at that time.
Well, I think that double referral will give more opportunity for these concerns to be fully fleshed out. I would just always encourage advocates, particularly those with meaningful opposition, to come forward as early as possible in the legislative process. But the good news is that with a second referral, there'll be more opportunities for discussion. And I do really fundamentally believe that you share the same concerns about these folks.
And I know they share our concerns, and we've been in discussions for a few months about this. So.
Okay. Other questions from the committee, from the senators?
I do.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
So we've explored this immigrant issue, the status, but what about felons? How does that work? Because is the DMV tracking felons?
There is a cross-check with the CDCR list that happens at a state and also at a county level. As we're all aware, individuals that are convicted of felonies and serve their state time have their voting rights taken away upon completion of their term. Voter registration rights are restored. So, again, there is a cross-check between DMV and CDCR. It's stipulated in the bill before somebody's added to the rolls on registration to verify that.
In the El Cajon DMV office, there was a big sting. They were producing driver's licenses for cash payments. And we don't know who they were going to. We don't know the rest. But the bottom line is I am uncomfortable on some level that those DMV employees, while I believe they should be prosecuted to the full extent of law, they may have thought that they were just doing some simple criminal act. I don't know what the penalties are, but I suspect that when you mess with elections, those penalties are much more severe. And I also fear for the person who gets this, who's on the list, who doesn't really understand. They vote because they think, wow, this is, there's an amnesty bill in the Senate, and I must be able to vote now because my attorney told me I could. So I'm picking on the Assemblywoman at this point, but the bottom line is I don't want to create a circumstance where someone's being prosecuted out of ignorance and we failed them because we're trying to cut a corner. And while I've been very supportive of bringing people online, one of the benefits that you have not talked about is jury selection. All those people are going to be eligible to be on the jury, and then I won't have to serve every year because we'll share the wealth. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to this, but I think that the short strokes, the details are crucial. I'm not going to be able to support it today. However, if we can close that gap, I'd be very open to supporting it because I think that our goal is a lofty goal that I believe in.
And thank you, Senator. And I know we usually agree on these matters, so it's tough. But I do want to point out that, as we have a system now, we've had situations, and I don't remember the El Cajon DMV, but we've had situations with fraud of registering people to vote in a way that's much not even employees of the state of California, quite frankly. So we've had on both sides of the aisle, a lot of times people who are registering voters are paid by the registration, and there is an incentive, a very low paid incentive for fraud. And so we've had these problems in the past. People have been registered inadvertently, through the phone book, through any means, going door to door, somebody getting the entire family's information. So it's not a new problem. And we can't, obviously, we can try to prevent fraud, and we do that. And I think most people are good people, and it's unfortunate that we have that, but we have that now in the registration process. There's nothing to keep bad actors from being bad, unfortunately, besides the consequences of breaking the law.
Yeah, I would just submit that the difference is when they have voter fraud and when they're registering, they know they're in trouble for voter fraud. When you're at the DMV, you may not realize that you're going to be in trouble on election law. That's the only difference. But I agree with you. Fraud is fraud, and people need to be prosecuted when they cross that line.
Language warning people as part of the process of registering. I mean, would that be? I guess my question
If you
is,
look at both the voter registration card and the disclaimers on the online voter registration process.
but that would be part of the vehicle of the driver's license registration process as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So at least there's some notice. Did you want to make a comment?
You're talking about people going forward would receive that notification?
Right.
Yeah.
Even retroactively, though, they'd still have to receive the postcard and the notification of qualifications and the right to pull your name off. So it's not a perfect system, but I think we're trying to set up as much protections as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really, Mr. Vice Chair, did you have any additional comments or questions?
No, I'm hoping to be able to vote for this on the floor because we can close that gap.
What would help you support it now?
Taking an amendment to close that gap.
What would that look like?
Well, you're putting me on the spot. I'd be happy to work with the author and work through something. But at this point, you're not familiar with my voting record, but I give nothing away for free, and I have no courtesy. So,
Oh, no.
call me Doubting Thomas. Let me touch that wound.
But when you say
Not even for me?
Listen, you know I want to, but
when you say the gap, though, we're talking about what exactly are you talking about?
oh, well, a couple of the items. One is the ensuring that people are not voting in error, thinking that they have a right to vote, and then later being prosecuted because they're not eligible to vote. The opt-in program forces somebody to actively say, I am trying to violate the law, because we clearly state what it is. This opt-out program assumes I'm a voter, so why should I deny what you're assuming? I'm more inclined to make that error because maybe the notice that's coming to me is in the wrong language, or maybe I have a disability and I can't read it for whatever reason or understand it for whatever reason. I don't want to put that person in jeopardy when they never tried to violate the law, but the law simply entrapped them. So while I want to get more people online, I want to preserve and protect all the people in the process. I don't believe that we should cut corners when it comes to elections. And I have no qualms about spending money on elections. So from that standpoint, and I'd be happy to go through and give you a stronger list of what the challenges are for me. You may have enough votes that it doesn't really matter what I think. But I do believe that getting more people online registered to vote is a good thing. And I do think that whether they choose to use their power to vote or not, the fact that we will get them into the courtrooms participating in their civil duty, I think that's a good thing. People need to be invested in their country. We get born here and we forget that there's nothing free about freedom. So I love these types of things. I'd be happy to work with you. But I also feel that the protections need to be strong as well.
Okay. All right. So I also serve on the Transportation Committee, so I'll get a chance to see the bill as it goes there. Assuming that it passes out of committee, I'm certainly willing to support it. In the absence of any other potential support today, I'll move the item, and we'll hold the roll open. So, thank you. Would Secretary please call the roll?
Allen?
Aye.
Allen, I. Anderson?
Soft no.
No. Hancock? Hertzberg? Lou.
So that's one vote in support, one soft no. What I will now do, so we'll hold the roll open for the other members to have a chance to vote. Let's now just do the consent calendar quickly, and, or should we just wait? Or just hold it open then?
I'll move the
It's been
consent.
moved, and we'll hold that roll open as well. So on the consent calendar, Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen.
Aye.
Allen, I. Anderson. Anderson, I. Hancock. Hertzberg. Lou.
Okay, I have to go present a bill, and I'm just getting a note that the committee that I'm presenting to is just wound down, so I'm going to hand over the gavel to the vice chair, who will ably handle the next bill, Assembly Health. Yeah. So we're next going to hear from Assemblymember Chow, AB 1443. I'm sorry? Oh, Lowe? Okay, so this is Assemblymember Lowe with AB 683.
Assemblyman, if you'd like to go ahead and present, and I'd like to just let you know that you have a support on both sides of the aisle, so.
Thank you very much for allowing me to present Assembly Bill 683 related to a voter accessibility advisory committee and some specific guidelines to help ensure that we have additional opportunities for those with disabilities to access the voter information. I respectfully ask for a vote.
Do you have witnesses in support? Do we have witnesses in opposition? Oops, sorry.
Mr. Chair and members, Jeff Tom, California Council of the Blind. Let me give you some context to our opposition. The California Council of the Blind is the largest organization of persons who are blind or vision impaired in California. We have been very active in voting rights issues for persons who are blind or visually impaired for many, many years. Issues such as sample ballot materials, making sure that online registration is accessible, absentee ballots, in terms of making in terms of bringing to fruition the possibility of voting independently by absentee ballots, websites, making sure that websites for the Secretary of State and counties will be accessible, and obviously DRE and other accessible voting machine issues that still come to light, among other issues. Originally, as the Legislative Council Digest indicates, existing law provided that there be a visually impaired board to deal specifically with these issues. That board does not currently exist, and it was our position that it would be far preferable to have that board and another entity to deal with other disability issues. We, however, are willing to be somewhat flexible in our position and in light of the fact that the bill is moving forward, and are willing to look at accepting one committee in light of the amendments that would have a specific committee to deal with blind and vision impaired issues. However, what is no longer in the bill are any references to specific members being appointed who are blind and visually impaired, and most expressly from organizations that advocate for the rights of persons who are blind and visually impaired, including the California Council of the Blind. If these specific types of members are not included in the bill, it is very possible that whatever advisory committee is established by the VOC in the future will not adequately advise the Secretary of State on our issues. Therefore, we cannot support any bill which does not reinsert provisions to specifically require that committee include members, that the VOC include members, and that committee include members who are blind or visually impaired, and specifically that it include those in advocacy organizations, including the California Council of the Blind. Thank you very much.
Are there other witnesses in opposition? Assemblyman, would you like to address that in your close, or would you like to address it before your close? I have the reason why I ask is I have a couple of questions for you. And now they elude me, but the last question I was going to have is I'd like to be added as a co-author.
Wonderful.
Go ahead and close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair, and for allowing me to close and also address some of the issues that was previously addressed. We were just made aware of these concerns late last night, and so we will be happy to work with the Secretary of State's office to address many of these issues moving forward. So I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
I would, one of the concerns I have, just on my own time here, I tell you, having the gavels and being the only legislator in the room, it's very powerful. So one of the concerns I have is as we've moved forward, we're supposed to be ADA compliant. We're supposed to already be taking this in consideration. And yet we just recently saw with Cover California that website's less than 2 years old, and it is not compliant. And that if you are visually disabled, the software that you use cannot read that web page. That's outrageous. So when people say that they want to do it, that's just lip service. We're not doing it. And as a state, we should be doing it. There's federal guidelines, and then we accepted over 6 years ago that we would accept those federal guidelines for state guidelines. And so I just want to make sure that this isn't an empty promise, that we're actually going to follow up and make this work. You know, we allow people with disabilities to get some advantages when contracting with the state, but the very website that provides those contracts, they can't access. So that makes no sense to me. If we say that we're going to do something, we should actually, our actions should reflect what we're attempting to do. So, but I like the direction you're going. I appreciate you working with everybody that's opposing. I think that what they're asking makes good sense. I'm going to go ahead and put this up for a vote. I'll be supporting it. We'll leave it open, of course, so the other members will be able to participate. So is this due process to appropriations, or where's this headed to?
It's fiscal.
So a due process to appropriations, can we do pass? Thank you, not due process. That's a whole different amendment.
Motion is due pass to appropriations. Allen? Anderson? Anderson, aye. Hancock? Hertzberg? Liu?
We'll leave the roll open. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation.